Welcome everybody to week 2 of our Central Otago Pinot Tour. Great to have you back on board. Really looking forward to this evening, 3 and 4 wines for some of you that really show a lot of promise. So we'll crack on. Firstly, as always, a couple of introductions. Unfortunately, we don't have Mark with us this evening. He's up in Brisbane doing our champagne gala. But of course, we have Alistair Cooper, Master of Wine. Welcome, Alistair.
Good evening, good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all again. I can see lots of people having fun around their table. And again, a nice start for me. Hi, Jane. Hi, everyone. Looking forward to this. The second week. Last week was brilliant. So really looking forward to getting stuck in and great to see you all.
Excellent. Jane Moore, the head of our events, and as I said last week, our resident Kiwi. Welcome, Jane.
Luke, welcome back to week 2, everybody. Looking forward to closing out this tour with you all. And thanks, Ali, as usual, for joining us at silly o'clock in the morning to drink wine.
Oh, always a pleasure.
And I'm Luke, one of the senior wine brokers here. So we do again have 2 very special guests that will be joining us later on in the evening. Firstly, Jane Parr, head winemaker at Varley. And then after that, we have Nick Mills, head winemaker at Ripon. And Nick will be taking us through the breakout room. And on that subject, we've actually had more people pick up the breakout room wine than not. So rather than actually launch a breakout room and have everyone, get up and have to, click enter on their screen, what we're going to do is just keep the tasting going on in the main room. Those who haven't bought the Ripon wine are still welcome to join us. Nick's a very interesting bloke, and I'm sure you've got a lot to gain from him. So please feel free to stick around after. But the main thing is, for those who've bought the breakout room, don't worry about anything. Just stay on the call, and we'll go on from there once we spin the wheel of wine. And on that subject, again, we have it on today with 2 quiz questions, same as last week. So just remember, text to that number there, your name, email, and answer. Just use the number. 1 correct answer gets you 3 entries. An incorrect answer gets you 1 entry. So good luck to everybody for that. Well done to Danny last week, who got the $50 voucher. Now, to give everybody enough time, and especially Jen, to talk us through the Ripon, we're going to do the first question as last week again. So the answer is, during the summer in Central Otago, the question is, during the summer in Central Otago, a breeze is common in the region, keeping disease pressure low. This is known as, answer 1, the Fremantle Doctor, 2, the Mistral, or 3, the Nor'western. So just remember the answer 1, 2, or 3 to the text number there with your name, email, and answer. Mark set this question up for me, so I actually don't know much about this. I was doing a bit of Googling just before we launched. Jane, Ali, any anecdotes you'd like to share with us on this one?
Well, no anecdotes. I don't want to give anything away. I'm confident I know which one it is. Let's leave it at that. But I think a lot of people will get this one right.
Yeah.
I've got faith in you all.
Well, the guys who came to the Rhone tasting last year, maybe that's giving away too much, may be able to exclude one of those answers.
Exactly, that's right. Yeah, one of these is the win famous in the Rhone Valley. That's right.
How are we looking, Jane? Are you seeing the text coming in?
Lots of answers coming in. I mean, this is definitely a Mark question. It's got that sort of wine geek element to it. Had to be but yeah, I think I'd probably give that about 10 more seconds, Luke, and then we can reveal the answer.
Okay. Well, whilst everyone's just getting their last text in, I may as well just cover it off. It's the spiel that I do every single tasting, but obviously we want these to be interactive, so please feel free to use the chat box if you've got comments or questions. If you feel like unmuting, feel free to interrupt us at any time and pose those questions to the experts. I'll be spontaneously picking on people through the night to hopefully unmute and give us their tasting notes. But yeah, It's the last week, so please feel free. So I think we're going to draw it there. The answer was, of course, answer number 3, the Norwestern. So well done. Did you get that one right, Ali?
I did, yeah. So by process of elimination, it would be the Fremantle Doctor is the famous one. Obviously, Fremantle's in WA in Western Australia, so that would be the cooling wind that comes in into Western Australia. The Mistral is indeed in the Rhone Valley. So the Nor'wester, by process of elimination, must be in Central Otago.
Fantastic. Well, that's a good 5 minutes, and we haven't looked at any wine, so I think it's definitely time to move into wine number 1. So Ali, I'm going to hand over to you, and we're going to look at the Maud.
Brilliant. Great to see you all again, as I just said. So let's get cracking. So with this first wine, we're down here, obviously down in Central Otago, and we're looking at the Maud, which is from Wanaka. Just go back one slide, Luke, so if that's all right. So we're going to be looking, I think, again with the Ripon in Wanaka. So this actually is one of the, we talked yesterday, last week, Jane talked about the mountain range and the effect it has in Central Otago. And obviously it's very important. I think the stat that Jane gave us last week is in Milford Sound, just, over the mountain range, we get 9 meters of rain. And over here on the other side of the mountain range, we're only down to about 300 to 400 millimeters of rain, which really isn't much at all. Wanaka is one of the cooler areas in Central Otago, and one of the relatively wetter, still within a relatively non-rainy framework for Central Otago. So that's where we're at with this one. If we go back now, Luke, if that's all right, to the wine slide. Do we have that or not?
Yes.
Thanks, mate.
Are you there? There we go.
I'm here. Yeah. Just wondering. That's the one. So here we are with the 2018, and as it says here, Jane told me this is one of our best-selling Pinots. I think we sold over 1,000 bottles last year, and incredible value. So we're going to be looking at, this is, as it says here, this is sourced from Central Otago's premium subregions. The main focus here, a lot of the fruit does come from Wanaka, but they source several other parts of the fruit from other regions within, other areas within the region. As I say, it's one of the wetter, cooler regions. One of the really important points is the lake here, and I think Nick will talk about that later with the Ripon Old Vine Mature. The lake is a really important part of preventing frost, and of radiating heat back to the vines. This beautiful lake that we can probably look at now, actually, Luke, if we move on.
Yep. Give me one tick. Keep on going.
And again, yeah, sorry, I'm shifting you around quite a lot. And another important part of the Wanaka region is altitude. And everyone talks a lot about altitude in the world of wine, but it is really important to mitigating temperatures. You go higher, you get this diurnal shift, and that's a very important part of Central Otago. Maud itself, before we get, I hope you've all poured the wine and tasted it. Actually, I'm going to give a couple of thoughts of my impressions on Central Otago Pinot generally. I remember tasting, first of all, it's important to remember this is a really young area. So I think the first commercial Pinot Noir from Central Otago was in 1987. So not long ago at all. And I remember tasting a lot of Central Otago Pinot from 2003, 4 to 2010. And while I didn't see huge stylistic differences, there were beautiful wines. And one of the key things that they did have was this freshness behind the wines. And I think now with vine age, Paul talked about it last week, vine age has become a really important part of the evolution of Central Otago Pinot. And the vines here at Maud were planted relatively, in the scheme of Central Otago, a long time ago in 1994, by the family of, I think it's Sarah Kate is the winemaker, along with her husband Dan, who used to work at Broken Wood in Australia. They've come over and taken over the helm and are producing these beautiful wines. So to taste this wine, I opened this yesterday and I was really hugely impressed, value for money wise, with what we've got here. If you remember last week, Sam talked a little bit about, I think, or Mark did, about whole bunch fermentation. which is a really important part of Pinot Noir and its evolution. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this wine, but I was impressed. Color-wise, it's amazingly light. It's not a dark, intense Pinot Noir at all. And some of the older Otago wines were. And on the nose here, I'd love to see if you guys can pick this up. It's got this herbal, what we might call stemmy freshness behind it, which comes often, I find, from the use of stems. I think they're using about 25, 30% of stems in here, which gives this herbal aromatic twist to the wine. For those that don't know, all wines used to be made in the olden days with stems. So whole bunches would come in and were fermented together. And now it's become a tool that's used largely with Pinot Noir and Syrah or Shiraz. It doesn't work so well with other grape varieties. And it's quite a contentious point, actually, how whole bunches are used now. I think that stemmy, fresh, aromatic, herbal, floral character that you get from stems can be a little bit overriding, but I think here it's perfectly judged. So 2018 was a warm vintage, and this is up at 14.5%, and you can taste the warmth. But as I said, with Otago, that freshness behind the wine is always there. So I'm gonna have a little taste. This is a combination for me, and I'm gonna get some tasting notes from you guys, of both red and dark fruits. I love that floral complexity that it's got. I think this has had about 10 months in French oak, which just fleshes it out a little bit. But let's see, anyone got any tasting notes on this? I think this is, $40. I think this is fantastic value for money. Anyone got any questions or thoughts on this wine?
Let's see.
We're gonna have to pick on someone.
Yeah, unfortunately. So, Keith, we didn't see you last week. So, knowing, managing your account here and knowing what kind of wines you're into, I'd be really interested to get your thoughts on the Maud.
Hi. Yes. No, I was up actually picking grapes out at Canandra, Chardonnay. So the reds have been a bit later coming. That's on next weekend. I find it a bit fulsome. It's nice and good, but it's a bit pushing forwards in a big blowing up, filling your mouth, and I tend to like much lighter Pinots. But that's my taste rather than commenting on this particular wine. Yeah.
I think that might be, Keith. I agree with you. As I said, 2018 was a crazy hot vintage, I believe, in Otago, and I think they were saved by a cool February. But I think perhaps with this, from what I read, I haven't tried that many of Moore's wines, but I've tried a few 18s. I think that is probably exacerbated in 18 as well. But you're right, it is quite full-bodied. Still has the freshness behind it, but yeah, it is quite a forward, riper style, I would say. Probably not like the yesteryear glycerol-y, big, chewy wines, but still, it's the alcohol and weight is certainly present with this wine. I agree.
It feels, in comparison with the last week, it feels bigger,
more voluminous. Yeah, I agree.
Puffing up your cheeks. I agree. It's a bit extreme.
Totally agree. I think looking back at value for $40, I think this is astonishing value. But yeah, it's certainly on that weightier style.
Ali, I'm conscious is Maud being a $40 kind of option that is a little bit more, I guess, of a we do a lot of volume of Maud in terms of sales. Yeah. Have they made that wine stylistically to kind of replicate what people want it or kind of expect from a Central Otago Pinot? For example, the two paddocks that we had last week, I found was quite elegant in style and maybe a step away from what we've normally can kind of expect from Central Pinot.
I think it's probably a combination of factors. As I said with this one, with Maud, and I talked about Wanaka and it being a cooler area. And I should think they have their Mount Maud, which is their sort of single vineyard from there, is probably a lighter, sort of stylistically lighter wine. And this does have some fruit, I believe, from Bannockburn and Bendigo as well, in there with it. So that probably, being the warmer areas, as we're going to talk about later, might might make that make this a little bit of a bigger wine. But I think also, yeah, I mean, this is their driving range. I think it will be more, dare I say it, sort of consumer focused. And then last week, as definitely with Sam's wine, it was really, really elegant. And I remember Sam saying, you know, they're struggling often where they are to even pick. So that was down at 13%. But again, coming in, you know, it's a combination, I think, of vintage, style, etc. But the great thing is, and I think this is what's key about this tasting, is to show actually the stylistic differences within Central Otago. Back in the day when I was tasting these wines, I really thought that actually they were all kind of monolithic, glycerol, heavy wines, always with that freshness, which made me see potential. But I think what we're seeing now as well, which is great, is to see those different styles evolving, and that Otago Central is capable of producing so many different styles. Peter, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I was curious. So when I opened this, it's obviously got a screw cap. I hadn't encountered the little top that holds the bottle as well. And when I popped that, there was a little bit of gas coming out.
What was that?
And interestingly, I don't know if your bottle has got that little white thing in addition to the screw cap as well, but there wasn't a big difference between when I opened this a couple of hours ago and the way it's tasting now. And I think there's that sort of freshness, a bit of peppery feel to it.
Yeah,
That's just sort of stayed there. Whereas I have tried the other ones a few hours ago, the ones that I've decanted, and some of them have changed even just in sort of 3 or 4 hours. So I'm not sure what if I haven't struck this before, unless it's just sort of part of the screw cap that came off. But all I know is when I peeled that off the bottle, there was a little bit of a release of like almost a gas coming out.
That's interesting. I'm just looking at mine, which I opened yesterday because I put my little Corvin top on it yesterday, and this is still on my desk from yesterday. I haven't got one of those inserts in mine, weirdly enough. Often they do. I haven't seen gas come off before. So you're sort of saying if there might be a link, Peter, between that and the fact it hasn't opened up compared to the other ones.
Well, maybe, but I certainly get that sort of freshness, the peppery, that fullness that we were talking about before. It's sort of quite different to some of the others we're going to taste.
Is this by an important person or just a person?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I don't know is the answer to that, Peter, in all honesty, with the screw cap. Maybe we can ask one of the winemakers later. But any other thoughts, anyone, before I think we probably need to move on to the next one, don't we?
Yeah, after this, I think if you can get through this question fairly promptly, Ali.
Yeah.
We've had Simon ask, how do you expect the Maud to age compared to, say, the 2 paddocks from last week?
In all honesty, I don't think it will age as gracefully probably as the 2 paddocks. I think that this is a wine that will age really well. It's under screw cap, will age really well for 4 or 5 years. I think the 2 paddocks is probably a more complex wine and will evolve longer. This is going to hold, but this isn't a wine for long-term cellaring, I don't think.
Excellent. Well, I think on the subject of age, it's a good segue into wine number 2 of this evening, which is the Peregrine 2014 vintage. So I'm going to hand over to Jane to take us through a bit of the history of Peregrine and this particular wine.
Awesome, thanks, Luke. I might get you to just jump into Google Earth straight away, just so I can give a bit of background on the Gibbston subregion, which is where we're heading for Peregrine. So, tiny bit of background. I worked in the Gibbston subregion for a couple of years at a different winery not too far from Peregrine. So, I've spent quite a lot of time in this area. And I spoke briefly about it, and I know Sam mentioned it last week, that Gibbston was the coolest of the subregions in Central Otago. So, and obviously, unlike Wanaka, what Ali just spoke about before, we don't have a lake to mitigate some of the frost issues and, heat it back up again. So there are, a few dangers there, but you'll also find that Peregrine, like quite a few other wineries like Sam and like Vale, Jen will touch on when she jumps on, a lot of these wineries, their first vineyard was in Gibbston. And that's because, as Ellie mentioned before, the first commercial Central Otago Pinot vintage was 1987, was from the winery Gibbston Valley Winery, hence where I used to work. So it was that region, that was where it all sort of started. So people started following suit and planting there, then spreading out to some of the other regions as Central Otago Pinot picked up more and more of a following and more of an international recognition. But we have a bit of a cool story about that a bit later on. But back to Peregrine. So you can see Peregrine Winery in the Google Earth maps there. You can sort of see this big, long structure. They have a bit of an interesting cellar door. So Peregrine, for those of you who don't know, is a falcon that actually, and this is obviously has something to do with why they've named it, actually exists almost everywhere in the world except for New Zealand. So it's actually technically one of the most common birds because it is prevalent in a lot of areas, apart from the real extreme like polar climates and extreme rainforests. But New Zealand's the only sort of ice-ridden country that actually doesn't have this bird. So what they've done with that cellar door there, Luke, if you just blow up that image in the top right, so they can sort of see that entrance there, they've modeled it after the wings of the peregrine and how that sort of how it flies. So it's quite a cool place to visit if you ever get the chance to go there. But yeah, Peregrine started in 1998 from the McLaughlin family, who still own it today. So it's still family run, the owner being Lindsay McLaughlin. We've got his son Fraser as a CEO, and the current winemaker is Nadine Cross. They are very, very big on organic practices and have been from the start. They have a real passion for the land. So it goes so far as to, when they do develop the land, they first use goat herds to clear it out of the lupins and the other sort of other plants that they don't really want there, the weeds, all sorts of things like that. They use goats to clear that out. And once they have developed the land and the vines, they use Wiltshire sheep. So during summer and during harvest, that sort of thing, they use sheep to keep the grass down, and then they bring them back again. Obviously, their manure goes back into those soils to, add that nutrients into the land again. So they are really passionate about that, and that's something that is really part of their brand and their philosophy that they like to stick to and have from the start. So I really respect that about these guys. Now, the wine that we're drinking, hopefully everyone's had a little bit of a sip. You probably will notice this has changed. I know it has changed a bit for me since I opened it and tasted it. But 2014 was overall quite a warm year in Central Otago. It seems as though, from my time there, for some reason, the even numbers have typically been quite warm. So 12, 14, 16, 18, as Ali suggested before. 18 was insane. I was there, and when they were tasting the wines and being bottled, and everybody was just, they were so different to normal. Not bad. A lot of them were really amazing. They were just so different. It kind of gave the winemakers a shock. But 2014 is a well-known, really nice warm year in Central Otago. So what happens when we get a nice warm year there is, again, Ali touched on it before with the whole bunches. You'll find that a lot of winemakers will tend to up that whole bunch percentage a bit, because the fruit is so well developed. It can really handle some more of that earthy, herbal flavors that come through from the whole bunches, as well as a bit more of that tannin that comes through from those stems. So this one's also spent 10 months in French oak. and about 25% new, which is very, very common for most Central Otago Pinots. I haven't seen a lot in my time there that spends much more time than sort of 10 or 11 months on oak, because you don't want to overpower such a delicate grape varietal. But if everyone's given this a bit of a taste, I find that this wine is probably in a really good drinking window at the moment. It's integrated those tannins have softened out nicely. It's matching through with that wild berry, those cherry fruits coming through. And I have to say I'm quite enjoying it. But what does everyone else think? Does anyone have any comments on this one?
You know. Hi, Jane. Fantastic. We love it here. It's Fred.
Oh, Fred, hi. Sorry, it took a second for your picture to come up. Lovely. I know you like your aged wines, Fred, so I'm not surprised to hear that. Beautiful.
And I would think it's peak, isn't it? Pinot should, at least Australian Pinot should be more than 10 years, and it's 14, so it's 7 years. So it must be pretty high.
Yeah, I think it can definitely hold for a bit longer, but I think it has come together and it's quite well integrated. There are a few Central Otago Pinots that honestly can age for 20 years, and I've tried a few really old ones there as well that are just showing beautifully. But I definitely think this will, and I think, yeah, Keith, he just mentioned it needs a bit more air. Looking forward to drinking it tomorrow. I think it definitely will continue to open up. And as I said, it's definitely changed a bit from when I first tried it.
Well, I poured about 6:15 when I opened it up, so it's had 45 minutes. It's a lower alcohol, I see, too, which is really good. Now, the first 1.5, this is 13.
Nice and warm year. So yeah, Central Otago definitely has that capability. Although in saying that, like I said, Gibbston does suffer some frost issues. I have experienced losing vineyards before whilst working there, which you do not want to be there for, and you do not want to be around winemakers when they find that out. But yeah, as I mentioned last week, things like helicopters and wind machines are used to try and mitigate that as much as possible.
It's interesting. So Jane, I think I told you on my, I couldn't get you got the 14, I've got the 16 here. I couldn't find the 14 over here in the UK. It's how similar were those two vintages, 14 and 16?
Good thing that you mentioned that. They are, I've found in the wineries I've worked at, fairly similar, which is why I'm glad you had the 16. And I found that, yeah, the winemaking techniques have been a little bit consistent across those years, especially at the winery I was working at. And so it doesn't surprise me if this one is showing a bit like the 14.
Yeah, I mean, I think the 16 for, you know, I'd highly recommend you go out and find it. I think it's looking in a really good place as well. And I think I talked about Sam last week with the two paddocks. We had the same thing. I think this is drinking really beautifully here. At the moment for me on sort of pop and pour, or Coravin and pour. And it's great to have wines that are drinking really well young, but definitely this is a wine that will age, you know, beautifully up to another decade, I would say. It's got forward fruit, but still structure behind it. And sounds like it's sort of similar maybe with the 14, that's in a good place, but will still, you know, develop.
Absolutely. Keith, I see your question about the helicopters. I might just, if you don't mind, table that question for now, and I'll answer it later on, just because I know we have Jen on here and want to make the most use of her time, whereas my time's definitely more available to you. So more than happy to touch back on that later. But Luke, I might just get you to go through quiz question number 2, and we'll introduce Jen.
Yeah, let's move on, should we? Welcome, Jen. I'm just going to launch our second quiz question of the evening, and then we'll crack on to the Varleys, if that's okay with you. So give me just 1 second whilst I get the screen going. Excellent. So question number 2. Between the 10 years from 1997 to 2006, wine production per year increased by what multiple? This is obviously in Central Otago. 8 times, 16 times, or 24 times? Again, a true Mark Faber question.
With us, he's here with us in spirit via these questions. Awesome. So this one, Ali, do you know off the top of your head what this might be? Just, or would you be guessing? Just curious.
Well, I'd be guessing, but I'd be guessing that from 97 it would be going from a pretty low base, which, you know, not many hectares planted. So,
and this this is a really nice segue into Varley, because it kind of connects the two, as I'm sure Jane can tell us about, I reckon, in about 15 seconds time, Jane.
Yep.
If that's okay with
Counting
you.
down now. Counting down now. Awesome. So I'd say we'll cap it off about there. So I'll a quick segue into that, into Jen coming up. As I mentioned, I used to work at Gibson Valley, and just very quickly, so Grant Taylor, who works with Jen at Valley now, he was the winemaker back at Gibson Valley during this time. Now, in 2001, Gibson Valley entered their 2000 Reserve Pinot Noir into international wine competition in London. And for the first time in history, France was beaten by Central Otago. First time that France had been beaten by anybody in that competition at that time. So if that didn't give you a clue as to how much the plantings increased and wine production in Central Otago during the early 2000s, I feel like everyone might know by now that it's answer number 3. Naturally, it attracted all the investors to the area once we got ourselves on the map. So that's all thanks to Grant Taylor and Alan Brady, who started Gibson Valley Winery.
Yay.
Excellent. And that leads us nicely into wine number 3, which is, of course, the Varley. So welcome, Jen. Jen, I'll give you a quick introduction for those who don't know you so well. Jen is an Oregon native and actually a graduate of Stanford University. And her wine journey took her from software sales in London to learning the craft with vintages in the States, South Africa, here in Australia, and then finally New Zealand, where she's now ended up. And I think, Jen, I read this was your 17th vintage in New Zealand, if I'm correct. Anyway, moving to work with Grant Taylor at Varley in 2014, her wines have been celebrated for demonstrating really great sub-regional prowess and site-specific qualities. And in fact, last year, these wines led to Jen being, winning New Zealand Winemaker of the Year. So we're super excited to have you on board, Jen. Welcome, and really interested to hear your thoughts on Varley and the Bannockburn. I think we've got you on mute at the moment. Are you able to unmute just there? There we go.
Oh.
Welcome. There we go.
Sometimes I think the world would like a mute button for me. You can be the judge. We used to have gongs for this kind of thing. The only thing I would add to my biography is I have spent quite a bit of time working in France, which is pretty influential in terms of wine in general, but especially Pinot Noir. So, and I say that in large part because it mirrors my experience, mirrors Grant Taylor's in many ways, except, you know, a little bit later in or closer in time to now. So yeah, so really excited to be here tonight. It's just past 9 o'clock and my husband and I are morning people rather than night people. So we've actually enjoyed a little bit of this 2017 Bannockburn with our barbecue pizzas tonight, but I saved enough to have some with you. So that's quite exciting. 17 is sort of, I think the current release in Australia edging towards the release of 18. And here in New Zealand, we're usually a vintage ahead. So for me, this is quite exciting to taste a wine that I don't get to try very often because it's been sold out in New Zealand for a while. So hopefully that's exciting for you guys in Aussie, because I think each year and each time I try it, it's showing more and more of the site and seasonality. And I think that's kind of, if I could just give a little history about us being Valley and what we do that is at least unique in New Zealand, probably not unique in the world because there's very few original ideas. But when Grant came back to New Zealand in 1993 after spending time in California and Oregon and in France, and he joined forces with Alan Taylor or Alan Brady, as Jane mentioned, he came with a perspective about how sites, aspect, subregionality, all of those things were really important, especially from Oregon and France. So when he decided to create his own brand in 1998, and he bought grapes for a wee while until his own vineyard came online, Gibston was what tugged at his heartstrings. And that was probably because of working in the Gibston Valley Winery and seeing so much Gibston fruit. And it was because of the perfume and the poise of Gibston wines. But he also had quite a lot of experience with Bannockburn. He made a lot of people's first wines, Mount Difficulty, Felton Road. There are numerous from Bannockburn. So he understood Bannockburn quite well. So given his experience from around the world, which later mirrored my own, or mine mirrored his, he thought, wouldn't it be great to find particular sites that he either wants to buy and develop or work with and show the essence of subregionality in Central Otago, New Zealand, which was quite a new thing back in the 90s. So the first Gibston wine came from 1998, and the first Gibston wine from our own vineyard came from 2003. Prior to that, we started making Bannockburn, and that was in 2001. So this is a wine that we've been making, you know, in this vintage, what is that? My maths aren't so great, but about for 16 years. Bannockburn in Central Otago is one in what we call the Cromwell Basin, or if you know Rudy Bauer of Quartz Reef, he likes to call it Lake Dunstan, like Lake Dunstan's side or something. Anyway, he likes to reference it as Lake Dunstan. But Lake Dunstan is a man-made lake in the Cromwell Basin. And Bannockburn is at the southern end of that. And it's sort of where the Kauro River forms, which connects to via Gibston into Queenstown, and not far from where the Clutha River, which is another prominent river in our region, carries on towards Alexandra. So Bannockburn is well known for its mining history, much like Bendigo as well. But it's generally viewed to be one of the warmer growing areas in what is a generally arid and dry region. Our site in Bannockburn that we made the 2017 from, that picture right there, I took that one morning, the last pick of the season. This is a little bit higher than almost every vineyard in Bannockburn. There's a couple of newer exceptions. So it's at about 350 meters of elevation, which is similar to our Gibston vineyard. And that makes it a bit later ripening and cooler. It's also nestled into a little hillside, and that provides a lee, which not only makes it frost resistant, but makes it a little bit cooler. So in these warmer growing areas, like Bannockburn or Bendigo, and I'm saying this a little bit for people on the line who follow us and know all of our subregions or a little bit about them, because to speak about Valley and only talk about one subregion it's like talking about a chapter out of a book. It's just a prelude to a whole story. So if I talk about some of the other growing areas that we work with, it's only to give reference to the whole story of who we are and what we do. So in the warmer areas, like Bannockburn and Bendigo, we look for cooler sites. So this cooler sites on this terrace above the sluicings is important in Bannockburn. In Bendigo, we're up on what's called Chinaman's Terrace, and it reaches up to 374 meters. Whereas in Gibston, we purposefully chose a slightly warmer site because it's a cooler growing area. This wine, to me, I absolutely love it. I've been making Bannockburn pre-Valley for longer than I'm more entrenched in Bannockburn in my history than any other subregion in Central Otago. And what I love about this site is the rewards and challenges of growing Bannockburn in a cooler site. So it's later ripening, which means, you know, we actually finished picking this vineyard after Gibston, which is known to be the latest ripening subregion in Central Otago. So it kind of is added to my gray hairs, and I'm a nail biter. So you know, it would be easier to be in one of the warmer areas where it all comes in a week or two, and there you go, it's in, move on, harvest party. But for us, it drags out over a 3 or 4 week period. But for this particular site in Bannockburn, we feel that's the right way to do it. There's a few different aspects to the soil. There's a lot of different clones. And so rather than picking it all when some is underripe and some is overripe and saying, here we go, this is a pretty good blend, we go for 3 or 4 passes, which for 3 hectares is quite labor intensive and expensive. But the goal is to create what we believe to be the best expression of this site. And the other thing I'll say, and then I'd like to take some questions because I feel like I'm having a monologue, is seasonality is a really important part of what we do. At Valley, we don't believe there are good years and bad years. If you pick the best sites or the sites that sing to you, and if you adapt and respond rather than react to seasonality, then you're going to express a beautiful place in a specific season. So some seasons for us are easier as growers or makers, and some seasons are a little bit trickier. Some seasons the accountants favor, some seasons they don't, but we don't believe they're in good or bad. And 17 was a cool season. We only got about 3.9 tons per hectare off this site. We normally crop it down to 6 ton. So that concentration, that beautiful fragrance, that spearminty, fresh green character. When I talk about green, I talk about freshness, not unripe. Unripe, I use other descriptors, because when I think about Pinot Noir, for me, it's like the rainbow. All of the colors factor in to a complete and whole wine. And if you take green out of the rainbow, you don't have real Pinot. So that's kind of my prelude to this. And maybe we can start with some questions. Had enough of me for a minute?
Never, Jen, never. That is an absolutely lovely Pinot. Congratulations on that. I think that's brilliant. How about we open the floor? Ali, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay, to get your opinion on this. And then I think it's worth just opening up the floor and getting some people's comments and tasting notes. So if you can give us a quick roundup of your thoughts, and then we'll start opening up.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, Jen. That was a great introduction. And the thing I've got to say that I touched on, that I really love what you just said about colours. And I think for me, that's a really important part, certainly of this wine as well. People talk all the time about fruit, and for me, colours are really important. And I often talk in wines about greenness, and people often look at me as though that should be a negative kind of thing. And I love that sort of the greenness and freshness that you should pick up in wines. I don't equate green as being something negative, but this ticks all of those boxes. There's vibrant fruit, there's that lovely green herbal freshness, there's aromatics, there's kind of baking spices, fine tannins. Again, this is a wine that's going to age beautifully. Really, really lovely wine. And people talk about Bannockburn as being this, quite a hefty style. I don't necessarily find this as being a hefty wine. I think it ticks all those lovely boxes of that green freshness as well.
Charles and Ana Rosa, we haven't heard from you this evening, and I know you're, always bringing a lot of creativity to the tastings with your food pairings. Firstly, what's on your plate today, and secondly, what's your thoughts on the Varley?
Get
There we go.
There we go.
Okay.
What's on the tasting plate tonight? And Rose, I'll leave that to you.
We had pumpkin phyllo pastries with flavored with macadamia nuts. Oh, yes. And lemon myrtle, which went really well with this.
Especially the first one.
Especially the first one. And then we also had a salad made with marinated grilled mushrooms and greens and chickpeas and avo and a dressing.
There we go. I think I'm not sure if you're up for this, Anthony, but maybe a collaboration between Charles and Ana Rosa and United Cellars to bring out a cookbook. I think that could work.
You have to include our neighbors, our friends who are tasting with us. We really enjoy cooking the vegan food together with the wines.
The mushroom and the cheese.
And the mushroom goes very well with cheese and the one Pinot as well, we discovered.
But sorry, on the wines, just while I've got the floor, I actually do have a bottle which was given to us as a gift as a Mount Maud, which is a 2014. Is that past its sell-by date, or do you think that's still drinking well?
Is it a Mount Maud?
No, Maud.
I wouldn't say it would be past its drinking date, but it would probably be in its drinking window. They do have different, you know, sort of brands within Maud. So they've got Mount Maud as well, which is, yeah. No, I would say drink now, but I'm sure it won't be past its drinking window.
As soon as we finish with this, we'll drink it.
What a difficult task. So mushrooms and Pinot, match made in heaven. So delicious.
Yeah.
Jen, I just wanted to, just while we've got you, pass on the question that Keith had about helicopter use in frost. I'm not 100% sure of how much you guys particularly use them, but would you mind just touching on that quickly so we can hear it from you?
Sure.
Right?
At Valley, we don't use helicopters in any of our vineyards for frost. Basically, there's a few ways to fight frost. The best one, which is often hindsight rather than foresight, is aspect and where you plant the grapes. So the Bendigo vineyard that we work with is at a high slope, but the slope is what makes it frost resistant. And this Bannockburn vineyard, because of that lee that I told you about, even though it's relatively flat, it protects it from frost. The frost just rolls down further down the road. So those two vineyards, we don't frost fight at all. Gibston and Waitaki, we fight with frost fans, which turn on, they're set and they automatically turn on, although vineyard managers always get an alarm and they have to go check and make sure they actually work, because machines, much like humans, aren't infallible. So that's the way that we fight frost. Another way that they fight frost a lot in Alexandra and some other areas in central Otago and probably New Zealand as well is with water. But you have to have a lot of access to water to do that. And there are pluses and minuses with that. Helicopters is the other way. So there's about 4 ways: aspect, wind machine, which basically is the same concept as a helicopter, which is circulating the air to make an inversion so that the cold air doesn't stick. Water, which basically freezes and protects the grapes, is kind of counterintuitive. But the best one, if you can pick the right site and the right aspect, and you don't always know until you've done it, is planting in a place that is frost resistant. Helicopters are very expensive. When a frost is predicted, I think it's, you know, a factor of a few $1,000s just to have them on standby. If you don't fly them, so right away you've already invested on the insurance plan, and then if you fly them, it costs a lot more. What often happens, say in Pisa Loburn, which is an area with a lot of vineyards owned by different people kind of lumped together, they might go in together and, you know, share the helicopter and they fly over all the vineyards. But that's basically, you know, how we address frost in central Otago.
Fantastic. Jen, we've had a couple of questions come in. I think everyone's tried the Bannockburn and is keen to try the 3 others. Briefly, could you take us through the stylistic differences between the 4 sites?
Yeah, stylistic differences are subtle. Basically, our raison d'etre, why we do what we do, is to express an individual growing area, which is usually a single vineyard, in a season. So our philosophy is very similar. We look at we handpick every vineyard. Most of them have at least 2, if not multiple passes, or more than 2 passes. We use fine grain French oak, somewhere between 25 and 32% every vintage. We question the use of whole clusters. We love to use them if the season allows. So we always look and say, can we use whole cluster? And if so, how much? But that's usually based on the parts of the site. The warmer sites like Bendigo tend to be more consistent with higher use of whole cluster. And then we don't fine and filter our wine. Beyond that, you know, how long they spend on skins, exactly the type of oak other than fine grain French, those things might vary subtly. And the way that I look at it is I think of these wines as part of our family, as our friends, and this might sound a little hokey, but you know, if you look at your friends, whether you have many or a few, you know, each friend is important in your life and you treat them with the same care and respect, but they all have different roles in your life. So one might be your tennis buddy, one might be the one you go to when something goes wrong, one might be the first person you call when so you have something to celebrate. But the point is philosophically or in your heart, they all are important friends, but you have a unique relationship with each of them. And what we started at Valley before my time was everything was kind of embraced in the same way. A third new oak, a third whole cluster. You know, they were all kind of made similarly, because at the time when the vines were young, before we understood the sites, before it wasn't a first date, before we had this concrete relationship with these places, that was how Grant made wine, right? And over the years, as we've got to know these places, then the 90% is still the same. We care and respect about our friends and family. And that 10% is the uniqueness of each place and our connection with that place.
Amazing. That's such a great answer. Thank you, Jen. I've just seen that Nick has logged in. So I'm quite actually keen to get Nick's thoughts on Vala. Jen, you mentioned you've got friends for lots of different reasons. I'm not sure if Nick is your drinking friend, but I'd be really interested to find out your thoughts on this particular wine, Nick, if you've tried it recently.
Put me on the spot, Nick.
It looks like he's on mute. There we go.
His wife drinks Valley. I'm not sure if he does.
Jen's my headbanging friend. That living room she's in right there is a great party room. I've headbanged to her lovely husband's band, the Black Lagoon, many times in that room, and I'm looking forward to the next one too. Sorry, Jen, what wine are you drinking?
We're drinking Bannockburn. It happens to be 17, but
lovely. Lovely. Well, I mean, it's just a really special history and a really special story behind what Grant and now Jen have established there, and really one of our I think success stories really in Central. Grant's been here since the very beginning, and well, pretty close to the very beginning, and now you're having these, you know, wines that are just such great, have great clarity and sense of place in the sub-regions they're working with.
Amazing. Anthony, I believe that you had a question.
Anthony's on mute too.
Technological challenge.
We've got you, yes.
First of all, I want to thank Jen. The wine's incredible, lovely. And I also want to say Jen's also made a lovely wine for us in our New Zealand business for the Tapui, I believe, which has been sensational. Something we'll try and get over to Australia hopefully very soon. I was asked, I think there was a question coming up actually, which I suggested to Luke, which is, what's the difference between the Oregon Pinots and what you find in New Zealand?
How long have you got? I came from Oregon, and I mean, basically you've got different climate and different soils. So Oregon, when I came to New Zealand, I sort of got quite frustrated because all of my New Zealand friends, and I was quite proud of Oregon Pinots and still am to this day, even though I don't have a stake in them, I'm just born there. And they would say, oh, the land of over extracted Pinots. And I didn't really understand what they talked about because I was kind of a young winemaker. And then I spent more time in New Zealand, and particularly Central Otago. And as we've moved away from extraction and a lot of extractive principles, I thought about how we were making wines in Oregon back then, and it was a lot of extractive principles. I'm sure they've moved on as well. Take all the winemaking away, it's a lot wetter there. You know, it's much more like France in a lot of ways. And it's got, you know, volcanic soils, Jurassic soils, very different soils. But what I love about Oregon is it's a community of lots of small growers. Kind of changed since I left in terms of some French and some Californians buying in, but let's just go back to the heydays when I was there. Lots of small families, up and coming people who just went with, you know, with no money and just a little backpack, and they said, I want to make these wines, I want to be a part of this, much like I did when I came to New Zealand. And so there's that spirit of just, I want to be a part of this and I can do anything. Quite different to Burgundy. You kind of have to be bought into that, so or born into that. So Oregon, they're just a beautiful expression of where they are. And then when you look at Oregon, you've got all these other, what they call AVAs, or what we call subregions or regions within New Zealand, but the best ones express that place and that soil and that moment in time. So is Oregon Pinot better than New Zealand Pinot? What is better? Is it older than New Zealand Pinot? Sure, generally speaking, but they're doing the same things we are. You have bigger corporate companies that get the wines all over the world, that spread the name, and that's important. And you've got these, 2-barrel things out of an urban winery in Portland, Oregon. That's, important. I think Oregon has a lot of synergy with us, but the wines are different. But that's the beauty of Pinot Noir. I think Nick Mills, talks about his friend Albert de Villaine, and it's about how, Pinot Noir is like a ghost that just it takes the form of the soils in which it's grown. And that's the beauty of Pinot Noir. If I'm on a soils call next week where we're supposed to talk about good and better soils or soils in general, but I can't do that. Pinot Noir can grow in a lot of soils, but it's not just soil, it's aspect, it's climate, it's vine spacing, it's the whole package. It's what we call, in France, terroir, or for us, it's kind of more like Tarangawawa, which is about being a part of that place and standing in that place. And Pinot Noir can stand in a lot of places in New Zealand and in Central Otago and all these little great growing areas. It stands tall and it stands individual. And that's what's special about New Zealand. And maybe Oregon has a way to talk about that too. But we have this history of New Zealand and the Maori culture that helps us express that. And to me, I love Oregon Pinot, but Oregon Pinot is Oregon Pinot, Burgundy is Burgundy. New Zealand Pinot is New Zealand Pinot, Rippon's Rippon, Valley Gibson's Valley Gibson. You can't just put a tag on anything. They're all living things with their own intention.
Jen, I'm conscious of everybody's time and also your own, knowing that it's getting on in New Zealand. For a lot of our guests, this is the last of the 6 wines that they'll be tasting for this tour. We've obviously covered regionality. We've covered quite a lot of history in Central Otago. I'm keen just to get your thoughts, if you could, for maybe only a few sentences, as to what you see happening in the next, 10, 15 years. What should we expect and what should we look forward to?
I think we should look forward to more thoughtfulness, more conscientious consideration of climate, both in terms of, like actual climate and the world climate. I think the younger generation is so amazing. I get inspired every day by the people who are going to take over my job and everyone else's job. I think you're going to think about Pinot Noir that not only better expresses our places in Central Otago, but is more harmonious with the world and will be more in sync with having wine as something that you might call a luxury or a part of culture, but actually being in tune with what the world needs and making it just more caring and environmentally friendly. I think that's what we'll see in the future.
Brilliant. Were there any other questions? Please feel free to unmute. We've still got Jen for a moment or so. If not, we can move on to the Wheel of Wine.
Luke, it's Fred.
Yeah. Hi, Fred.
Hi. Last week we had the able to speak, and he used a consultant from Martin. Many people think Martinborough is one of the top areas in. I'd like the comments from Central Otago versus Martinborough. And Jen feels the same way that Sam does about the similarities of the poor soils with the old lake versus the old river terraces in Martinborough.
A lot of that broke up, but if you're talking about the differences between Central Otago and Martinborough, a lot of it is climate and soils. As you're saying, a lot of it's old river valleys, although we do have the influence of river valleys here. I don't think, again, I think the best vineyards and the best growers and makers in Martinborough are expressing a place and a time, and their place is different. They've got those river gravels with the more free draining soil. They've got more clay. They've got a warmer climate, a wetter climate. So the differences are really in all the factors that the grapes are grown in. But in terms of how the wines are approached in the winery, I think we're kindred souls. They've been in it a little bit longer than most of us, but they're making wines that are more savory and more true to their place, as are we. So I think, isn't that the beauty, that you don't have to just drink a Central Otago Pinot or just a Wanaka or a Gibson or a Bannockburn Pinot. You could throw a Martinborough in, and actually don't discredit Marlborough. There's some fantastic Marlborough Pinots that are grown in the right places. Then throw in something from North Canterbury, and then, Nelson when they get a good vintage and they've been plagued by a lot of rain. But that's New Zealand Pinot. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Central Otago is the best Pinot. It's what I know and it's what I love, but we're all in the same, you take the same size winery that's family owned or independently owned, and we're all trying to do the best thing, express our site, express our place. And, I thank God for all these other people that we can learn from in New Zealand, but they're just making wine to their landscape, as are we.
Thank you.
Amazing. Well, Jen, thank you so much. I think just to reflect what's kind of going on in the chat, you're speaking about it so eloquently. So thank you for sharing your thoughts, and thank you for making absolutely amazing wines, as well as anything else.
Thank you so much for having Valley. I really appreciate it. And I don't get to go to Australia last year, or I didn't get to, and I probably won't this year. So this is as close as I may come. So thank you for having me virtually visit all of you.
Thank you so much, Jen.
Pleasure. Thanks, Jen.
Appreciate it.
Cheers, Jen. Thank you so much. So let's move on to the Wheel of Wine. Hopefully everybody can see that then. Again, an amazing turnout. So well done to everybody who got 2 correct answers, and well done to everybody who got any answer, actually, because you're all in for a shout. I'm going to give it a quick spin and let's see who's won. Daryl. Well done, Daryl. Are you around? Can you give us a quick toast if you're around on the gallery view?
He's typed in woohoo. So
I've loved the wines. I've really loved the Valley, of course. So just thought it was fantastic.
We're big Valley fans.
Yeah.
So we love the Valley.
I never win anything, so I'll be spending it with you later on, Luke. Don't worry.
Good man, good man. Well, actually, on that subject, we'll just cover off the wines here. We got tons of orders on last week, so thank you for everybody who picked up some wine. And again, if you're interested in revisiting any of these, if they've really impressed you, we do have good stock of all 3. And they're just a little bit sharper with regards to price point than normal because you've come to the tasting. So feel free to text in name, wine, and quantity. If you have a broker here, just get in touch with them. Or if you want to use the QR codes there, they're all set up for you. And as you can see there's a website promo to enter to get that price point. So thank you for that. I'll leave that on the screen for a second. Ali, any thoughts on those wines in general just before we hop into the Ripon?
No, I'm just going to sort of echo what I said before. I think what we've seen over the 2 weeks is the stylistic differences that there are within Central Otago, and this is something that that has developed with vine age over time in a really short space of time. I can see in Otago. I remember, as I said earlier, between 2002, 2007, 8, I tasted quite a lot of Otago Pinots, and I found that there are a lot of similarities. And what I'm loving now is this stylistic differences between different regions, between different winemaking techniques. Obviously, vintage variation plays a huge part, vine age. And no, I've loved to see and be part of tasting these really obvious stylistic differences between the wines and the different sites within Central Otago. So it's only inspired me to want to get over there as soon as possible.
Amazing. So great wrap up there. I should say to everybody who's leaving us there, we'd love to see you for more tastings. We've got the Rosé comparison next week. The big one, Old World versus New World, Master of Wine debate on the 18th. There's been lots of orders on that one, so we'd love to see you there. And then finally, we've got Japan's Grace Wines on the 25th. And we always say we're always interested in your thoughts and suggestions as what you'd like to see. It's quite it's a changing structure and a changing schedule. So if you really want to, see wines or see a region or see a country toured, then just let us know and we can try and set it up for you. So I should say thank you to everybody. Thank you to the winemakers and the guests and the experts today. If you have the rip on, then just stay there. If you don't have the rip on and you're interested in hearing Nick's thoughts, please stay with us. I'm going to move on to the breakout room wine, which is the Ripon Mature Vine 2017. So just to give Nick a quick introduction, and Nick, thank you for sticking with us. I know we're slightly over time, so really appreciate your patience there. For those who don't know Nick, he's got a huge winemaking pedigree, head winemaker at Ripon. He's done vintages at Jean-Jacques Coufferon and Domaine Romanée-Conti, to name a few. But really, since 2002, Nick has been one of the trailblazers of the organic and biodynamic movement in Central Otago. But more than all of that, Nick, you're actually the first winemaker to feature twice in our tastings. So that's probably the biggest accolade I think you could ever get. So welcome, and yeah, really interested in hearing your thoughts on this one.
Oh, thanks again for having me. Amazing. And yeah, just to reiterate on Jen's thoughts, you know, it's this is kind of seems like the new world order, the new world wine order. How we're communicating, and I'd love to be over in Australia and seeing you all in person. And I miss it hugely. This time of year, I would be somewhere in between Sydney and Melbourne, and hanging out with my many friends and colleagues over there, and drinking and sharing wines in person. But this is the way we're doing it these days, and so let's crack on into it. Do you want to have a look at the wine first? I can't see who's out there. How many people we got? Are we ready to go? What are we doing?
Yeah, I think everybody's got the Ripon in their glass. So I'll tell you what, I'll go into gallery view so we can all see each other.
Oh, that's nice. So
There you
thank you. Yeah, because I was seeing all the people that were in on the tasting with Jen, and it made me a bit envious. Yeah, so I could give you a little bit of Wanaka subregion, because you haven't been there yet, I think, tonight. So we could talk about that. I could tell you a little bit about Tinkersfield and Emmersblock, but I could also maybe tell you a little bit about Ripon.
So Nick, just to let you know, we briefly touched on Wanaka earlier when Ali spoke about Maud, but he did leave a few things up to you. Luke will bring up the Google Earth for you so we can show them where you are.
I'm going to pour myself a glass of wine.
Cheers.
Good health. Have you got it?
I'll tell you what, Nick, why don't we jump back into Google Earth? So
help me out. That's nice when you can actually see what's going on. Okay, yeah, right, cool, thank you. So if you go back a little bit, zoom out a wee bit, and I'm sure this may have been discussed a little bit, but if you can see, yeah, go right back. Yeah, there you go. So obviously New Zealand maritime, mostly a maritime climate where we are in Central. You can see it from space. It's pretty much brown. It's the only thing stuck in behind those mountains. There's 3,000 meter peaks straight out of the ocean. You've got 5 to 10 meters of rainfalls on the west coast, and as that moves across those westerly systems, they just lose all their humidity and moisture as they come across. So yeah, even from space, you can see Central Otago. It's a really, really beautiful region in terms of a geographical indicator. It's protected from the south and the east, as well as the west. High and dry. New Zealand's only sort of pseudo-continental climate. Those that have been listening would have, I'm sure, be up to speed with that part. But what I like is the fact that you can see it from space, and to get into there, you either have to come out up a gorge or over a pass to get into it. And you zoom in. Oh, that's a good angle. How about we just crank it on that one?
Yeah, great.
It's like a satellite flyover. So yeah, and you can see that's quite nice there too. You can see Central Otago is kind of like a Y. You can see the Queenstown and the Wakatipu Basin out to the left, and you can see the Upper Clutha Basin, which is Wanaka, up the top there. And you can see how close Wanaka is to that main divide. If you see Mount Aspiring National Park there, that's those 3,000 meter peaks straight out of the ocean, and we are the closest to that barrier. That's really the macro of our whole region. So everything's coming towards us now in a norwesterly system, and as it comes down that valley, these two valleys, it's drying out. So by the time it gets down to Alexandra below us here, it's New Zealand's hottest and coldest and driest place. But where we are in Wanaka, it's the most temperate, that's to say the softest. It's not as hot, not as cold, not as dry as the rest of central Otago. And then you've got a big lake as well, so it's got a huge thermal mass. It changes 2 degrees from summer to winter, so it's going to warm things up on a cold night, cool things down on a hot day. It's a soft inland camp. In fact, Wanaka has the same root word. I don't know if you covered this off before, but the same root word as Wananga. Wananga is school or place of education or workshop, and that's so it's a place where Māori used to bring their families, and while the blokes were going over the main divide up there at the top of the screen and going to get punama or local jade, the families would stay here and teach hunting, fishing, gathering, genealogy, survival essentially in this environment. So yeah, and that's really important to us as well. So it's a soft inland camp where you might want to bring up your kids, and that's going to tell you a lot about our place. It's also going to tell you a lot about our wine, because the further you get down the valley, you're going to get with higher diurnal range, you're going to get a little bit more density of fruit, where here we don't have that same sort of climatic overlay of fruit or flesh in the wines. They are quite honed down and precise, and that sort of is jarring with some people. They don't have a lot of softness or flesh. They are quite articulated and detailed, and that's just something you have to get used to with these sorts of wines. Can we go back out a little bit, please, Luke?
Of course.
Was that you on that, Luke? Yeah, just a little bit more.
How's that?
Yep, that's pretty good. Or maybe just sweep round to the right a bit.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. Just like that. So our great-grandfather, I don't know if anyone's tuning in from Melbourne at the moment, can tell you a little bit of family history. That Frederick Thomas Sargood married Emma Rippon, the last Rippon in our family, and they immigrated from the UK to what was to become Victoria, and set up shop with a tent in the port town of Melbourne, in St Kilda, and started importing soft goods into the gold rush that was happening over in Norway back in the day. And they had brought their 10-year-old son Frederick James Sargood, and he became a really important businessman. The merchants made all the money. He also became a politician, and he was the first senator of Victoria when the states became federated. And he built Ripon Lee in honor of his mother's maiden name, which you'll know is still there. It's where Attica is, and now a suburb of Melbourne. He married Marion Rolfe, and they had 9 children who grew up at Ripon Lee. And one of those kids was Percy, and Percy's our great-grandfather. Percy came out to New Zealand to carry on the same idea when the gold rush was happening down here, and into the largest port town, Dunedin, and came up and fell in love with this piece of land. Actually, interestingly, we only found out this last year, but he was at the Brigato conference, the Brigato lectures, where Romeo Brigato, a Victorian, actually Italian, but he was employed by the Victorian government to go around Victoria looking for viticultural possibilities, and he got employed by the New Zealand government as well to do the same over here. And our great grandfather was at the lectures at the Chamber of Commerce in Dunedin, and saw that and heard about the potential, and wrote back to his dad in Melbourne and said, "Yep, there's a potential down here in Central." And that's kind of where we started our thing. Our dad, who grew up with our great grandfather, they had wine on the table, and it was another, I guess, 70, 80 years before we started experimenting with vinifera. So that was in the early 70s. And by that stage, everyone said nothing would work. There was a regression of thought from Brigato all the way back to, by the time we were starting to experiment with vines on this beautiful piece of land, there were government warnings saying don't plant here. At any rate, I'm trying to segue into the wine. Please do get into it. Ripon is that hill that you're looking at right now, but Wanaka Station, the farm that our great-grandfather bought, was a lot bigger than that. It was about 18,000 hectares, was pretty much the basin we were looking at, well, at least the western part of the basin we were looking at earlier. And at those days, it was a really isolated farm unit. That's to say, it had no diesel. You had to 80% of the whole farm was just for growing grain, just to feed the horses. It was all run by horses. It had its own live-in cooks. It had a cook shop. It had this sort of sense of self-sustaining farm unit even back then. And so that kind of legacy has been with us ever since. Ripon for us, even now, is, even though it's a much smaller part of the original homes, the farm, the original station, Ripon for us isn't an individual that we maintain a relationship with. And what I mean by that is that it's an identity. You could say it's a spirit, if you like, but really it sits with us at the table when we make a decision making, at a decision making process. It would be like, so what would Ripon ask of us in this situation? So it's very much part of the decision making process. And we farm it as having its own, as I say, individuality and sense of identity. So the wine that you've got in the glass actually is the voice of that identity, and that's how we see it. We do have other wines, and actually I mistakenly got the wrong one. I'm sitting here with Tinkersfield, which is a much more sort of Emma's Block and Tinkersfield. You're looking at Tinkersfield right now. That is Tinkersfield, named after our dad. His nickname was Tink, and he dreamed up this beautiful idea of planting grapes in central Otago, and took other people with him, and that was the original plantings right there. Emma's Block, just around the corner, east facing. I'll talk about that just really quickly, and the fact that they are kind of singular clima, the singular sites, like a Cistercian or a Burgundian construct, if you like, a doff to the head of our Pinot Noir reference points as Pinot Noir growers. But really, the most, let's say, the more archetypal version of terroir that we have, the one that represents us the most and our farm the most, is the one you've got in the glass, the Ripon Mature Vine Pinot Noir. And that's why it's repeated on the label. It says Ripon Mature Vine Pinot Noir. So Ripon is the name, it's the lieu dit, it's the place name. And then in this case, well, it's a vineyard, but it's a farm as well, and it's the complete voice of that farm.
Nick, go on, Ali, after you.
Go.
I am obviously I'm over here in the UK. I could only get the 15 here, which is I'm not unhappy with. I couldn't get the 17 like everyone else has got in Australia, but I'm very happy with this 15. But so mature vine, how mature are the mature vines in this mature vine Pinot?
Yeah, we actually don't call it the mature vine. You'll see in terms of the label hierarchy, it says mature vine Pinot Noir in little print underneath it. That's kind of like just the plant material. We actually have 3 mature vine Pinot Noirs. So that's the Ripon, the Emma's Block, and the Tinkersfield. What you're actually looking at there, Alistair, if you look at it, you've got Ripon as the brand, and then you've got Ripon as the lieu dit or the place name. So it's very much like, in this instance, it would be like Clodata or Domaine de la Romani Conti. You get the brand or the domain, and then you get the name of the vineyard underneath. And in this case, it's the whole farm. That's the broader answer to your question. The more accurate one is these are vines that are planted between 1982 and 2000. So, and the majority of them, nearly all of them, are on their own roots. They've been organic since inception. They've been unirrigated and biodynamically farmed since 2003. So yeah, we like to think they've got real true purchase on the land. They're very fine, articulate root hairs, being vinifera straight into the ground that can get into this rock, into schist. So it's like very foliated and leafy rock. So those really much more fine root hairs of vinifera are more adept at that. So that, I guess, brings forward the idea of, if you ask me about how maturity works, this is really for us, it's when the seed becomes ripe, when the seed is, when you're at sugar ripeness and the seed ripeness is at the same time, which, doesn't always happen. Doesn't happen for a while when as grapes are growing. But once the vine is throwing all of its energy into the seed and the stems and the skins, that grants you the opportunity to chew the whole bunch, including the seeds and the skins and the stems, and get saliva in your mouth and be able to swallow all of that material without, and what that does is it grants you the opportunity then therefore to extract all of that material into the wine without having to fine it out later. So that's for us what mature vines are, is once they get to the point where we don't fine or filter like Jen was talking about before either, even in our young vines. But in our young vines, if we want to work with the tannins of those, we have to be a lot softer. We don't have the same opportunity of extracting all of that seed material. So, and for us, all of the language of terroir, if you like, of place and site, is wrapped up in tannins and shape and feel. It's not about fruit and flower, and it's not about all the attraction factors of the color and the flavors and the smells and the alcohol. That's just for the bird to come along and eat the grape. For me, the most interesting thing is all the information a vine can take from its place and issue it into its progeny, so it can be successful in that same place. Right? That's all that's what it's doing. So the seed is the vector, is the medium where terroir is translated. And we know this from Burgundy. The difference between Vendôme and Nuit Saint-Georges is not cherries and plums or anything like that. It's shape and feel and form. That's a long-winded question to a very short answer, but somewhere between in our site, somewhere between, I'd say 20 to 20 years, you start getting a bit more accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the time you get above 30 years, now you've got absolute precision and detail. And then, of course, you start getting wisdom. You get things that weren't previously there. It's just like human age, really. Before that, they're teenagers and recalcitrant. And
well, that's great. This 15 is tasting beautiful, I've got to say. I mean, it's aromatically so much purity and vibrancy that, you know...
it's very similar to the 17. It is very similar to the 17. You're not far off there.
Good. Well, it's cracky. I mean, this is a wine. I'm glad I used my Corrigan, because this is a wine that I can see I can put this away for 20 years. No problem. It will still be absolutely singing. The tannins that you're talking about, there's so much depth to them, so much profundity and density behind them, as well as being completely fine-tuned, but with this purity of fruit on the nose. It's absolutely beautiful wine, Nick, and I'm pleased to put this away and come back to it in a few years.
Nick, I'm going to open up the floor to some of our guests' questions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Stephen, we haven't heard from you this evening, and the Colmers. What are your thoughts on the Ripon?
Luke, thank you. My thoughts on the Ripon, of the 4 wines we've tried tonight, as a group, I think we find the Ripon the most interesting, the most kind of full and interesting on our palates. It's an excellent wine. Always a good indication. We've got a number of wines served here in front of us, and it's the wine that we've all enjoyed and finished. So, I always think that's a really good indication.
Awesome.
We kind of also like the Valet, but the Ripon just slightly more advanced on the Valet, a little bit more complex on the palate, and a little bit fuller and a little bit richer, and just really nice structured length. So excellent wine. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Yeah, well done. Nick, I have a question for you. As a wine broker, we use critics' scores quite a bit to kind of present the wine, and being conscious that we have Alistair here who scores wines, I'm interested. This particular one, as I'm sure you know, picked up 99 from James Suckling. After hearing, the way that you treat this wine and the way you treat the farm in general, what are your kind of thoughts on scores? Because I feel like just a point score really doesn't encompass everything that you've just spoken about. Does that fit for you, or I'm sure you absolutely love hearing 99 points next to a wine that you've made, though?
It's
I've left you speechless. That's amazing.
Well, Luke, I know it helps you, and I know it helps brokering, and I think that's important. I mean, and that in turn helps us, but and I heard Jen say something similar to it just as she was signing off. But I don't really talk about wine in qualitative terms anyway. Like it's a very difficult thing for me to talk about wine in in qualitative terms. It's in terms of, you know, texture and shape and feel and detail and precision and, as I say, articulation and enjoyment and digestibility and you know, how it feels, how it makes you feel. All of those things are far more important to me than scores, of course. And I think probably if anyone was honest about it, well, not anyone, some people are, that is important to them. And, but you know, I'm really happy that that the palate, I think, has evolved with our wines, because we haven't really ever done anything differently. And you know, I think our wines, and I heard you, Alistair, earlier on saying how, you know, you've loved to see the evolution of Central Otago and separate into subregions and getting that sense of place and diversity. You know, we're kind of a precursor to a lot of that, just because we the oldest vines in Central, some of the oldest vines in Central. We have, you know, they're all on their own roots. They've been unirrigated for a long time, so they really are living tissue issued of that place. And so we haven't really tried to fit our wines with a market. And I have to say that when I came home in 2002, after 4 years in studying and working in Burgundy, that I was lost. I really didn't know. I communicated. I'd learned wine in a different language and a different lexicon, and I think that for a long time, the wines that were the most exciting and the ones that were issued from young vine fruit, which is all about exuberance and vitality and daring color and animation, which is a lovely wine. We have a Jeunesse, we have those sorts of wines. They were the ones that were getting rewarded, getting qualified by high scores and stuff. And I think now with the increase in complexity and definition in our wines in Central, as they've also started to be qualified under those terms of precision and accuracy as well, which is just what we've always done. And so I think now people are sort of starting to understand the value of this type of wine, and it's working for us, obviously.
Fantastic. Let's see who else hasn't spoken. Sorry if I'm going to pick on people. What about Michael Brooks?
Come on, Michael.
He looks like he's, or the Michael Brooks table, maybe.
Any heckling's good heckling. I'm okay. I'm not sensitive. You know.
Here we go.
What do you got for us, Michael?
You can give us one-word answers if that's all you're happy doing.
Suspense is killing me.
Oh, you can't see me. We're having a lovely time, and I've loved all of the wines. And yeah, it's been good. Yeah, I'll pass over to David now, who actually ordered the wines, who knows a lot more about wine. So there you go.
No, I have to say the Rip one has been fantastic, and for us, we're fairly new to this, and I guess more broadly, just actually discovering the Otago region and discovering the incredible variety. But just listening to the discussion we've just had, it's been fantastic in terms of just what the grape on that region and how it's treated and how the natural part of it has just come out of it. Just fantastic. I like the idea that you've done nothing, but the world's come along with you is fantastic. But the idea that you've got a nice match of the grape to the region, to the climate, to the environment, and to the product and the winemaking, it's fantastic.
Thank you, David. Is it? Thank you, David. Something that's interesting about this wine that you're tasting as well, and to talk to that is, we weren't Pinot Noir geeks, okay, so our parents studied in France and learnt their craft in France, and so did Joe, my wife, and I, and my sisters as well. You know, they worked and lived over there as well. Our whole family sort of are quite francophile, but it's not. We weren't like born Pinot Noir geeks that were looking around the world for a piece of land that would be able to emulate a culture that existed somewhere else on our place. And that is a model that has worked in New Zealand. Many of my colleagues and close friends have succeeded with that model. You know, trying to find the perfect place where they can grow Pinot Noir like they first fell in love with it in Burgundy. Our story is a little bit different. We've had a long-standing relationship with a singular piece of land, and then we adapted our culture to that. So Rolf, our dad, planted like 25 to 30 different cultivars, lots of different varieties, different selections. And over 3 decades, our family, that was our school holiday job when we were kids, was to take the best performing varieties, the ones that were most comfortable in their sight. That's to say, we're issuing the most balanced fruit, that they didn't need sugar, water, acid, nutrients, vitamins. Yes, they didn't need adjustment and must to find balance. If they were balanced, we would take the cuttings off those particular vines, the individual vines and the varieties, and put them through our own nurseries, and then plant it out parcel by parcel over many decades to select down to all of the plant material that we have there today. So that's so in terms of a selection process to the site, as you just mentioned, David, and actually understanding that it wasn't like we sort of put a finger out and said, oh yeah, this is the spot, because that's virtually impossible to do, I think, as well, because you know, you need track records. You need, even if you were watching it for 10 years, our family had been watching it for, you know, since 1895, really, is when Percy started writing back to his dad, talking about Central Otago, this far away and wondrous land, and tried to identify what the potential of that land might be over time. So it's a different sort of trajectory.
Well, thank you. It's been fantastic.
It's great. Thank you.
Amazing. Should we maybe have a couple more questions? Jason and Rebecca Corlett, I think you guys are fairly new to our tastings. You were hoping not to be picked on, I can see. There we go. Was there anything that you guys were interested in asking Nick, or giving us your feedback or comments on the wines in general?
We didn't actually get to try the Valley. We had a bit of an ordering malfunction. The Ripon. So we had the 6 wines, but we wanted to listen in anyway because we're actually all from New Zealand.
Ah, fantastic.
Not one trip to Australia.
It's an honorary. Sorry. He gets London. I'll put the night down. Yeah, but no, we really enjoyed all of the wines, and we've been to that region a number of times. And it was just really fun to visit back this evening and try some different things that perhaps some of us hadn't tried, or different vintages as well. So yeah, we've just had a great time. Thank you. Excellent.
Well, I'd love to see you again if you fancy any of the other tastings. Whereabouts in New Zealand do you guys come from?
All over. I'm from Christchurch.
Oh, we've lost you. I think we had Christchurch, and then
I got Christchurch.
Yeah.
North Canterbury.
Peter, what are your thoughts on the Ripon?
Wow, what an honor. I get to speak twice. Well, I've had the Valley before. I've got a few older bottles in the cellar. And I've had the Ripon before. A Ripon, fantastic wine. It's an absolute fantastic wine. Those two have changed a little bit, opened up in the last 3 or 4 hours. I'm glad I decanted them. No need for Corrigan with these bottles. We'll take care of them today and tomorrow, no problem. But just a lovely wine. I like the idea of any wine that tastes as good with the last glass as when you open it. You know you've drunk a wonderful bottle of wine, and well, the Ripon is absolutely at the top of that category. So, and a lot of what I've heard in terms of both from the last two wines, explains a lot about the rugby that is represented by the Otago region as well. So a lot of wonderful cultural things we pick up in these online tastings. I really appreciate that.
Thanks, Peter. It was interesting how you say the evolution of the wine in the glass, and Alistair was talking about just the ageability as well. We haven't really found the end point of our wines yet. So we did when we released our 2012 a number of years ago, which was in 2014 we would have released that, or 2015. We hold all our wines a year in bottle before they're released. That's why you're tasting the 17 as a release now. So it's a year and a half in barrel, and then it's at least a year in bottle before we release them. So we generally trail vintages over most of our colleagues. But when we released the 2012, we did a series of, it was the year we celebrated 100 years on the land and 30 years of wine growing. And so we did a number of vertical tastings. You got me? And really the wines from the early 90s are still showing really well. They're still hot. So it's an interesting thing. And to your point, Alistair, how I see them evolving isn't like a decay. It's almost like a decompression. It's like, because they are really, really compressed and tight. Those tannins are so compressed when they're young. It's almost like this sort of delamination. It makes me feel like the schist, like it's really, really foliated and leafy. And it's almost like so compressed, metamorphosized. And then over time, it just opens up and lets you see layers that unfurl over time.
Like
that's kind of how wines age.
Like a spring
exactly.
Yeah, that's a lovely way of looking at it, actually, Nick. And I can kind of taste that in the wine. It is.
Yeah.
The tannins, they're fine, they're sculpted, but they're compact.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. And we don't see and with that, I think it needs clay when you to get a sense of viscera, to get a sense of decay in your wines like you have in Burgundy. You're more talking about a clay limestone complex or a forest floor style environment. Our soils aren't very, very far removed from Burgundy's in terms of Burgundy's much more about as clay and limestone, which is, in a biodynamics terms, is much more soil bound energy. And so even the people that live there, the Cistercian monks, it was very austere. You look down at the ground. Here in Central Otago with this stuff, it's like everyone's up and you get sunburnt under here and under here. It's a different style of culture that has been informed by the land, and and how that informs the wine is quite different as well. It's much more crystalline and straight, rather than, you don't get that sense of decay that you would get in Burgundian Pinot Noirs.
Yeah,
amazing. To Peter's point, I'm not sure that I'd relate Richie McCaw to either of to the two Pinots that we had there. I don't think he's quite as elegant as the Varley or the Ripon. I mean, being an Englishman, I'd say he was a bit of a cheater as well. I know that might offend. I know that might offend a couple of the Kiwis we've got in as well, but no, he's a very good rugby player. Ali, is there anything that you'd like to say? I know you had a part in picking the 7 wines for the tour, as well as Jane and Mark. Is there anything that you'd like to kind of say to wrap us up for this evening, or anything you'd like to comment?
I think, I'm just really would say, you asked me to wrap up half an hour ago, or whatever, and it's probably echoing the same thing. We see how things have changed is remarkable, and the evolution of Central Otago, and seeing all the, the different stylistic things. My opinion, say, 15, 20 years ago, was of this, you could see that there was always freshness and elegance behind these rather monolithic Pinots that seemed to be what I tasted at the time. But it's just fascinating to see, and I can't wait to see the next 20, 30, 40 years, to see the different styles that are coming out of Otago, and then to taste wines like the Ripon that we're tasting now, that has just got endless life to it. And a lot of that I do. I'm a big believer, as well as Nick is, clearly, of biodynamics and what that can add to wines, and I believe that's probably a large part of Ripon's its longevity, as well as the way it's crafted. And great winemakers like Nick will always say that they don't do a great deal. Well, I don't believe that. I think the investment in the vineyard that you have to create wines like this, it could not be underestimated, and that's a huge amount of work. But no, for me, this has been, so great to see. And I do believe, having tasted what we've tasted, we could do a 4, 6, 8 week, Central Otago tasting and still be looking at all these little nuances behind the wine. And without doubt, is one of the great regions of the world for Pinot Noir, and for me to taste these as well, and to see it, and really good value for money as well. I can't afford Burgundy anymore, but I can afford some of these wines. So I want to fill my cellar up with some of these beautiful wines as well.
Excellent. Well, Nick, I should say a big thank you from the team at UC, and also I'm sure our guest was echo it. Thank you so much for your expertise. I know we're cracking on into your evening, so thank you for your time.
Pleasure. Can I say a little thing on that?
Please do.
Yeah, I heard someone say old world, new world earlier on, and there was a battle or something like that. I just don't believe those exist anymore. I think we're new world because we're New Zealand, and we got, at some stage New York and New Orleans became the oldest 2 cities in the States, and they're part of the old world now, those cities. And when is that going to happen for us? I think there's mature vines on their own roots, unirrigated, biodynamically farmed from multi-generational families in this country. There's, so in South Africa even more so. I don't think that's a relevant talking point anymore. And in terms of identity, I would also say that that we are, as I said before, we started this whole education. We went back to our cultural reference point as Pinot Noir growers and took as much as we could, and they offered it freely and willingly and beautifully, and we created exchanges, and we continue to have really strong friendships and relationships with them. And that now it's time for us to take that on, and so and our identity is coming back to, as Jen sort of was alluding to, much more to our own indigenous identity here in New Zealand, and that is coming into our wines and how we approach our wine growing and our farming and our sense of belonging and our sense of self. And that's really the exciting thing that's happening in our industry right now. And I don't want to take that away from what we've learned from our colleagues and friends and family in Burgundy, but that's where we're off to. And so really exciting times, and follow us on that journey. And the other thing is, last thing, thanks Luke for your patience. But the last thing is that drinking is an agricultural act. There was Wendell Berry. I'm borrowing off Wendell Berry, a North American environmentalist. He said eating is an environmental act. So the fact of everything that you put in your mouth, your choice, your purchase decisions, your mine as well, everything that we put into our mouth eating has an effect on a piece of land somewhere. And that's really, really important to us. Dan, drinking wine is also an agricultural act. And so, if you're trying to make a difference, like we all are having to try and make a difference right now, understand what those effects are on land somewhere by purchase decisions of wine, and see where that takes you. There are many people like us around, but families that are trying to do right by a piece of land, that anything we make is just trying to go back into a piece of land and looking after it for hopefully a few more generations to come, and try and maintain the pastoral values and identity of that piece of land rather than putting it into cars or anything else. There's a difference, believe me. So thank you very much for tuning in, and I hope that didn't get a bit ranty, but that's my thoughts.
No, that was fantastic, and I think that was a really nice kind of sentiment to leave it on, actually. So yeah, I should say thank you from the team. Jane, thank you so much for your thoughts and your expertise on the 2 wines over the tour.
Of course, Central Otago is definitely holds a place in my heart. So as you might have guessed, I'm a bit passionate about that area.
Thanks, Jane.
And Ali, thank you again for coming in and giving your expertise.
No, always my pleasure. We're all on a journey of learning, and hearing Nick's last words has made me feel very happy. I must have drunk and eaten a lot of land in my time. So I'm doing my bit for agriculture, and brave warriors are as well. So no, it's been one of the most eye-opening couple of weeks actually for me, and great to share. And we can't travel, but it's great. I feel like I've traveled into many of your homes and shared glasses of wine with you in the last couple of weeks. So thank you, and look forward to next week to the rosé tasting. Whoever will be joining in, and thanks to everyone, and thanks again, Nick.
When the borders open, do come and see it. It's so cool looking into people's living rooms, but come see us. We'd love to see it. It's a beautiful place to visit, and we'd love to show you what we do. Come see us.
Love to be
very much so.
Thanks, guys, and a great kickoff to a Thursday morning for me as always.
Excellent. Well, thank you
so
to everybody who came to the tour. Really looking forward to seeing you for any of the upcoming tastings you've got booked onto. Please get in touch if you'd like to come to more. But until then, have a nice evening.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Nick.